In the quiet corridors of St. Mary's General Hospital, where the fluorescent lights hummed their eternal song and the smell of disinfectant mixed with fear, one woman walked the night shift alone. While doctors slept in comfortable beds at home and day staff enjoyed their families, Maria Santos pushed her medication cart through darkened hallways, checking on patients who couldn't sleep, comforting the dying, and saving lives that others had given up on. For 12 years, she had been the invisible guardian of Ward 7, the woman everyone took for granted. Patients knew her gentle touch and soothing voice, but hospital administrators barely acknowledged her existence. Her suggestions fell on deaf ears, her reports were filed away unread, and her warnings about security weaknesses were dismissed with condescending smiles. But on one terrifying night in March, when armed insurgents stormed through those same corridors she had walked thousands of times before, Maria Santos would prove that the person everyone ignored was exactly the person everyone needed. In the span of 8 hours, this overlooked night nurse would become the thin line between chaos and hope, between terror and survival, between life and death for dozens of innocent people. This is the story of how one woman's courage, born from years of quiet dedication and fueled by an unbreakable will to protect those in her care, turned her from an invisible hero into a legend that would be whispered about in hospital corridors for generations to come. Maria Santos pulled her worn cardigan tighter around her shoulders as she stepped through the automatic doors of St. Mary's General Hospital. The March evening air still carried winter's bite, and her breath formed small clouds that disappeared quickly in the fluorescent glow of the entrance. At 43 years old, she had been making this same walk for 12 years, arriving precisely at 10:45 p.m. for her 11 p.m. shift. The security guard, James, barely looked up from his crossword puzzle as she badged in. "Evening, Mrs. Santos," he mumbled, not bothering to make eye contact. James had worked the evening security shift for 3 years, and in all that time he had never once engaged her in conversation beyond these perfunctory greetings. To him, like to most people at the hospital, Maria was just another piece of the background, as unremarkable as the beige walls or the humming ventilation system. Maria didn't take offense. She had grown accustomed to being overlooked, invisible despite her vital role in keeping Ward 7 running through the long, difficult hours between midnight and dawn. She made her way to the elevator, pressing the button for the 7th floor where the medical and surgical patients stayed. The elevator climbed slowly, its mechanical wheezing a familiar soundtrack to her evening routine. Ward 7 was a 40-bed unit that housed a mix of post-surgical patients, chronic care cases, and elderly individuals recovering from various ailments. During the day, the ward bustled with activity. Doctors making rounds, physical therapists working with patients, families visiting their loved ones, and a full staff of nurses, orderlies, and assistants. But when the sun set and the last visitor left, Ward 7 became Maria's domain, and she ruled it with quiet competence and unwavering dedication. She stopped first at the nurses' station, a semicircular desk positioned strategically, to provide sightlines down both corridors of the L-shaped ward. The day shift nurse Jennifer was completing her documentation, her fingers flying across the computer keyboard, as she recorded the day's events and medications administered. Jennifer was 26 years old, fresh out of nursing school, and full of the kind of energy and optimism that Maria remembered having once upon a time. "Hey, Maria," Jennifer said without looking up from her screen. "Room 712 is asking for pain medication again. Mr. Rodriguez in 704 pulled out his IV twice today, so watch him. Mrs. Chen in 701 hasn't eaten anything since yesterday morning, and her daughter is worried sick. Oh, and the new admission in 701 is complaining that his call button doesn't work, but maintenance says they can't look at it until Tuesday." Maria nodded, already mentally organizing her night. She had developed a system over the years, a careful rhythm that allowed her to provide the best possible care to her patients while managing the practical realities of being essentially the only nurse on duty for 40 beds. The hospital administration had been cutting night staff for budget reasons, leaving her to cover what should have been a job for at least 3 people. Dr. Patterson left orders for the woman in 719, Jennifer continued, finally looking up. She's scheduled for surgery tomorrow morning, first thing. NPO, after midnight, usual pre-op prep. And Maria? Jennifer's voice took on a slightly apologetic tone. "I know you mentioned the security cameras in the East Wing have been acting up again, but Mr. Patrick Acapier's Williams in administration says they're working fine. He checked them himself." Maria suppressed a sigh. For months she had been reporting that several security cameras along the East Corridor were malfunctioning, displaying only black screens or cycling through static. She had submitted 3 written reports and spoken directly to Harold Williams, the evening administrator, twice about the issue. Each time, she was told that the cameras were functioning properly and that she must be mistaken about what she was seeing. But Maria knew what she saw during her nightly rounds. She walked every corridor of Ward 7 at least 6 times per shift, checking on patients who couldn't sleep, responding to call lights and administering medications. She had noticed that the cameras at the far end of the East Wing, near the emergency stairwell, showed nothing but darkness on the monitors at the nurses' station. When she mentioned this to the day shift nurses, they shrugged it off, saying they had never noticed because they were too busy during their shifts to monitor the camera feeds closely. "I'll keep an eye on things," Maria said simply, taking the report sheets from Jennifer. She had learned long ago that arguing with administration was futile. They viewed her as an aging night nurse who lacked the education and credentials of the younger staff, someone whose concerns could be safely ignored. What they didn't know was that Maria Santos had not always been a nurse. Before immigrating to the United States 15 years earlier, she had been a lieutenant in the Philippine Army Nurse Corps, serving in field hospitals during civil unrest and insurgency operations in Mindanao. She had treated bullet wounds under artillery fire, organized evacuations under sniper fire, and developed an acute awareness of security vulnerabilities that came from years of working in genuinely dangerous environments. When she tried to explain her background to hospital administrators, they smiled politely and nodded, but she could see in their eyes that they didn't believe her stories of military service. To them, she was just an immigrant nurse with an accent who worked the undesirable night shift. They couldn't imagine that this quiet, unassuming woman had once commanded a field medical unit and earned commendations for valor under fire. After Jennifer left, Maria began her evening routine. She checked the medication cart, ensuring that all controlled substances were properly secured and that she had adequate supplies for the night ahead. She reviewed the charts of each patient, noting any changes in condition or new orders from physicians. Then she began her first round of the evening, moving systematically from room to room. Room 701 housed Mrs. Patterson, an 84-year-old woman recovering from hip surgery. She was awake, staring at the ceiling with the kind of restless anxiety that often affected elderly patients during hospital stays. Maria knocked gently on the doorframe before entering, her soft-soled shoes silent on the linoleum floor. "Patterson," Maria said, her voice warm and reassuring. "How are you feeling tonight?" The elderly woman turned toward her, relief evident in her faded blue eyes. "Oh, Maria, thank goodness you're here. I've been having trouble sleeping. The pain isn't too bad, but I keep thinking about things, you know? Worrying about whether I'll be able to walk properly again, whether I'll be able to take care of myself." Maria pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, something that always surprised patients because most hospital staff remain standing during brief check-ins. This simple act of sitting, of making herself physically equal with the patient rather than towering above them, was one of the many small things that set Maria apart from other nurses. "Tell me about these worries," Maria said, taking Mrs. Patterson's hand in both of hers. "Sometimes talking about them helps us see them more clearly." For the next 15 minutes, Maria listened as Mrs. Patterson shared her fears about aging, about becoming dependent on others, about the possibility that this hospital stay might mark the beginning of a decline that would end with her in a nursing home. Maria had heard similar concerns hundreds of times before, but she listened as intently as if it were the first time, offering gentle reassurance and practical advice based on her years of experience with post-surgical recovery. "I've seen many patients with your exact surgery," Maria said finally. "With good physical therapy and patience with yourself, you'll likely be walking better than you have in years. The arthritis in your old hip was probably causing you more problems than you realized." Mrs. Patterson squeezed Maria's hand. "Thank you for taking the time to talk with me. The day nurses are nice, but they're always so busy rushing around. You make me feel like I matter." "You do matter," Maria said simply. "Rest now. I'll check on you again in a couple of hours." This pattern repeated itself throughout the ward. In room 704, she found Mr. Rodriguez, a middle-aged construction worker recovering from gallbladder surgery, sitting on the edge of his bed looking frustrated and uncomfortable. His IV had indeed been pulled out and his hand was swollen where the needle had been. "Let me guess," Maria said with a gentle smile. "You tried to get up to use the bathroom and forgot about the IV line." Mr. Rodriguez looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry, nurse. I know I'm causing trouble." The day nurse seemed pretty angry when it happened the second time. Maria began preparing supplies to restart the IV, her movements efficient and practiced. "You're not causing trouble. Hospital equipment takes some getting used to, especially when you're not feeling well. Let me show you the best way to manage the lines when you need to get up." As she worked, Maria talked Mr. Rodriguez through techniques for moving safely with IV lines and urinary catheters, showing him how to arrange the tubing to prevent tangles and how to call for assistance when he needed it. She had learned that taking a few extra minutes to educate patients often prevented problems later in the shift. "You know, Mr. Kit," pride, Rodriguez said as Maria secured the new IV with tape, "you're different from the other nurses, more patient. Like you actually care about us as people, not just jobs to get through." Maria had heard similar comments many times over the years, and they always touched her deeply. She did care about her patients as individuals, learning their names, their fears, their family situations, and their hopes for recovery. But she also understood that her approach was seen as inefficient by hospital administrators who measured success in terms of tasks completed per hour rather than quality of care provided. By 2 a.m., Maria had completed her second full round of the ward. Most patients were sleeping, but she had spent time with several who were struggling with pain, anxiety, or the general discomfort of being in an unfamiliar environment. She had administered medications, changed dressings, helped patients to the bathroom, and provided the kind of emotional support that didn't appear in any job description but was essential to healing. She was returning to the nurse's station to update her documentation when she noticed something that made her pause. The security monitor that displayed feeds from the cameras throughout Ward 7 was showing the usual mixture of empty corridors and patient rooms, but the cameras covering the East Wing were still displaying nothing but black screens. More concerning, she thought she had seen a brief flicker of light in one of the darkened feeds, as if someone had quickly shined a flashlight and then turned it off. Maria stared at the monitor for several minutes, waiting to see if the flicker would repeat itself. The East Wing of Ward 7 housed the hospital's emergency stairwell and a service elevator that connected to the loading dock in the basement. During the day, the area saw regular traffic from maintenance workers, delivery personnel, and hospital staff moving between floors. But at night, it should have been completely empty. She picked up the phone and dialed the number for hospital security. After 4 rings, James answered with a voice that suggested he had been dozing. "Security desk, James speaking. James, this is Maria Santos on Ward 7. I'm seeing some issues with the security cameras in the East Wing, and I think there might be someone in the stairwell area." There was a pause, then a slight sigh. "Mrs. Santos, I've got all the camera feeds here at the main desk, and I don't see any problems. The East Wing is clear, but the cameras are showing black screens on my monitor up here. Could you check cameras 7 through 12 specifically?" Another pause, longer this time. "Hold on." Maria could hear the sound of James moving around, presumably checking his monitors. "I'm looking at all the feeds right now, and they're all showing normal empty corridors. You might be having a problem with your monitor up there." Maria felt the familiar frustration of being dismissed, but she pressed on. "Could you do a physical check of the East Wing stairwell? I know it's a long walk, but I have a feeling something isn't right." "Mrs. Santos?" James's voice took on a patronizing tone. "I've been doing security for this hospital for 3 years. I know how to read the monitors, and I know when there's a real security issue. If there was anyone in that stairwell, the cameras would pick them up and the motion sensors would trigger an alert. Everything is normal." After hanging up, Maria sat at the nurse's station feeling troubled but unable to articulate exactly why. Her military training had taught her to trust her instincts, especially when multiple small details didn't add up properly. The malfunctioning cameras, the brief flicker of light, and the dismissive attitude of security all combined to create a sense of unease that she couldn't shake. She decided to conduct her own investigation. Taking a small flashlight from the emergency supplies, Maria left the nurse's station and walked toward the East Wing of Ward 7. The corridors were dimly lit by emergency lighting, creating pools of soft illumination separated by stretches of shadow. Her soft-soled shoes made no sound on the polished floor. As she approached the area where the malfunctioning cameras were located, Maria moved more cautiously, staying close to the wall and pausing frequently to listen for any unusual sounds. The hospital was never completely quiet. There was always the hum of ventilation systems, the distant beeping of monitors, and the occasional sound of elevators moving between floors, but she had learned to distinguish between normal nighttime sounds and anything out of place. Near the emergency stairwell, she stopped and crouched behind a housekeeping cart that had been left in the corridor. From this position, she had a clear view of the stairwell entrance and the service elevator. For several minutes, she saw and heard nothing unusual. Then, just as she was beginning to think that James might have been right about her overactive imagination, she heard something that made her blood run cold. From somewhere below, drifting up through the stairwell, came the sound of voices speaking in hushed tones. The words were indistinct, but the cadence was wrong for hospital staff having a normal conversation. There was an urgency and intensity to the whispered exchange that suggested people who were trying very hard not to be detected. Maria's military training kicked in immediately. She recognized the pattern of communication used by people conducting covert operations. The careful modulation of voice and timing that indicated coordinated group movement.
Someone was using the emergency stairwell to move through the hospital undetected, and they were heading upward toward Ward 7.
She quickly but silently made her way back to the nurses' station, her mind racing through possibilities and response options. Her first instinct was to call security again. But James had already made it clear that he didn't take her concerns seriously. Calling the police might be premature if she was wrong about what she had heard. But if she was right, and hostile individuals were moving through the hospital, her patients were in immediate danger. Back at the nurses' station, Maria sat down at the computer and began typing a detailed incident report, documenting everything she had observed and heard. If something was about to happen, she wanted there to be a record of her warnings and attempts to alert security. As she typed, she kept one eye on the security monitors, watching for any change in the darkened East Wing cameras. At 2:47 a.m., her vigilance was rewarded. One of the black screens flickered briefly to life, showing a shadowy figure moving quickly past the camera before the feed went dark again. Then another camera caught a glimpse of movement before cutting out. Someone was systematically disabling the security cameras as they moved through the East Wing, heading directly toward the main patient areas of Ward 7. Maria's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the phone to call security again. But before she could dial, she heard something that made her freeze in terror. From the direction of the East Wing came the unmistakable sound of the emergency stairwell door opening and multiple footsteps moving into the corridor. She turned off the desk lamp and crouched behind the nurses' station, peering around the edge of the counter toward the East Wing. In the dim emergency lighting, she could see shapes moving along the wall. At least 4 or 5 figures dressed in dark clothing and moving with military precision. Even from a distance, she could see that they were carrying weapons. Maria's military experience told her immediately that these were not ordinary criminals or confused patients. The way they moved, the coordination of their approach, and the systematic disabling of security cameras indicated a well-planned operation by people with training and specific objectives. This was an organized assault on the hospital, and she was the only person in a position to sound an alarm. With her heart pounding, Maria crawled to the emergency phone mounted on the wall behind the nurses' station. This was a direct line to the hospital's emergency response system, bypassing normal security and alerting multiple agencies simultaneously. But as she reached for the phone, she heard a sound that stopped her cold. From room 7201, where Mrs. B. Magnan Patterson was sleeping, came a soft cry of fear, followed by a harsh male voice speaking in accented English. "Nobody move. Nobody make sound. We are here for different business, but we will kill anyone who interferes." The insurgents had reached the patient rooms, and Maria's worst fears were being realized. Armed individuals were now threatening her patients, the vulnerable people she had sworn to protect and care for. In that moment, all of her military training, all of her years of experience dealing with crisis situations, and all of her deep commitment to her patients crystallized into a single, unshakable resolve. She was not going to let anything happen to the people in her care. Whatever was about to unfold in Ward 7, Maria Santos would be ready for it. Maria's training from her years in the Philippine Army Nurse Corps flooded back as she crouched behind the nurses' station, her heart racing but her mind becoming crystal clear. She counted at least 5 distinct voices coming from the patient rooms, all speaking in what sounded like Arabic with occasional English phrases. These weren't random criminals looking for drugs or money. This was a coordinated operation by people who had studied the hospital's layout and security weaknesses. Moving with the silent precision she had learned during night operations in Mindanao, Maria crawled to the emergency supply cabinet and retrieved her master keyring. If she was going to protect her patients, she needed to understand what these intruders wanted and how they planned to use Ward 7 for their purposes. The layout of the ward, with its 2 long corridors forming an L shape, would either work for her or against her depending on how she played this situation. From room 712, she could hear Mrs. Botal, Patterson's frightened whimpering, and a man's voice speaking in harsh, clipped sentences. "You stay quiet, old woman. We are not here for you, but if you cause trouble, we will kill you. You understand?" "Mrs." Patterson's voice was barely audible as she whispered, "Please, I won't say anything. I just want to go home to my grandchildren." Maria closed her eyes briefly, fighting back rage at hearing this terrified elderly woman being threatened, but rage would not help her patience. She needed to think tactically, to use every advantage available to her. The insurgents might have weapons and training, but she had something they didn't: intimate knowledge of every inch of Ward 7 and 12 years of experience moving through these corridors in complete darkness. She crawled to the medication cart and quietly opened the locked compartment containing emergency supplies. Among the cardiac medications and emergency drugs, she found what she was looking for. Several vials of sedatives that could be useful, and more importantly, the emergency communication device that connected directly to the hospital's command center and the city's emergency response system. The device was about the size of a pager and designed to be used during hospital-wide emergencies like fires, chemical spills, or mass casualty events. When activated, it would simultaneously alert the police, fire department, hospital security, and the hospital's emergency management team. But Maria hesitated before pressing the alert button. If she triggered a massive emergency response while armed intruders were holding patients hostage, the result could be a bloodbath. Instead, she activated the device's silent mode, which would send a text alert to emergency services indicating a security situation requiring immediate but covert response. This would bring help without triggering sirens and flashing lights that might provoke the insurgents to harm patients. As she worked to send the alert, Maria heard footsteps moving down the corridor toward the nurses' station. She quickly pocketed the communication device and crawled to a position where she could observe the intruders without being seen. 3 men emerged from the patient rooms, all wearing dark tactical clothing and carrying assault rifles with practiced familiarity. The leader was a tall man with a neatly trimmed beard and eyes that constantly scanned his surroundings with military precision. He spoke quietly into a radio device, reporting their position and status in Arabic before switching to English to address his companions. Rahman, take position at the main elevator. Nobody comes up to this floor without our permission. Khalil, watch the emergency stairs. I want to know immediately if hospital security tries to investigate. The leader's English was good with only a slight accent, suggesting significant education or time spent in English-speaking countries. The third man, younger than the others and clearly nervous, approached the nurse's station where Maria was hiding. She pressed herself against the floor behind the medication cart, barely breathing as his boots stopped just inches from her position. Through the gap beneath the cart, she could see his legs as he examined the computer terminal and communication equipment. Commander Asher, the young man called out. The nursing station is empty, but there are signs that someone was here recently. The computer is still logged in, and there's a warm cup of coffee on the desk. Commander Asher joined him at the nurse's station, and Maria could hear him moving around the area, checking the medication cart and examining the patient charts. His training was evident in the systematic way he searched the space, looking for threats and gathering intelligence about the hospital's operations. The night nurse must be somewhere on this floor, Asher said. Find her, but do not harm her unless she poses a direct threat. We need someone who understands how this hospital operates, and nurses have access to areas and information that could be useful. Maria's mind raced as she processed this information. These weren't terrorists planning to harm patients randomly. They were here for a specific purpose that required inside knowledge of hospital operations. But what could they possibly want with a medical facility that would require such an elaborate and dangerous operation? The answer came as Asher continued giving instructions to his team. Remember, our primary objective is the research laboratory on the 10th floor. Dr. Mitchell's work on viral countermeasures is exactly what our employers need, but we cannot access the laboratory without proper authorization codes, and those codes are changed every 6 hours by hospital security. What about the security override system? Asked Rahman, the man positioned at the elevators. The override requires biometric verification from a senior hospital administrator and a department head. Since we cannot access administrators at this hour, our best option is to find someone with enough system access to help us reach the laboratory level. Maria's blood ran cold as the full scope of their plan became clear. These men were after biomedical research data from the hospital's secure laboratory, and they planned to use hospital staff to help them bypass security systems. Dr. Mitchell's laboratory was part of a government-funded program developing countermeasures for biological weapons, exactly the kind of research that foreign hostile groups would kill to obtain. But they had made one crucial mistake in their planning. They assumed that a night nurse would have limited access to hospital systems and could be easily intimidated into cooperation. What they didn't know was that Maria's 12 years of exemplary service had earned her higher security clearances than most nurses possessed. As the senior night nurse for Ward 7, she had access to emergency protocols and override systems that could either help them achieve their goal or completely shut down their operation. She also had something else they didn't expect, the tactical knowledge to make their mission extremely difficult, and the personal motivation to protect not just her patients, but also the crucial research they were trying to steal. From her hiding position, Maria could see that Khalil had positioned himself near the emergency stairwell, while Rahman controlled the main elevator. Asha was systematically searching the patient rooms, probably looking for her while also ensuring that the patients remained quiet and compliant. This gave her a brief window of opportunity to move without being detected. Using skills she had developed during night operations in the Philippines, Maria began moving through the ward using alternative routes that the intruders wouldn't expect. The hospital's design included service corridors, utility spaces, and storage areas that connected different parts of the ward without using the main hallways. As the night nurse, she had master keys to all of these areas and intimate knowledge of their layout. Her first priority was reaching the emergency communication station located in the secure supply room near the center of the ward. This station had direct connections to the hospital's command center and could provide real-time updates on the intruders' activities to emergency responders who were hopefully already mobilizing in response to her earlier alert. Moving through a maintenance corridor that ran parallel to the east wing, Maria made her way toward the supply room while listening to the intruders' radio communications. They were speaking primarily in Arabic, but she caught enough English phrases to understand that they were following a detailed timeline and that their window for accessing the research laboratory was limited. Base Command, this is Team Viper, she heard Asha reporting. We have secured the 7th floor and are beginning Phase 2. Estimated time to laboratory access is 45 minutes. 45 minutes. Maria realized that whatever emergency response was coming, it needed to happen quickly, or these men would escape with research data that could pose a threat to national security. But she also knew that any direct assault on Ward 7 would put her patients at extreme risk. She reached the supply room and quickly accessed the emergency communication station. The device allowed her to send encrypted messages directly to emergency services and provided a secure channel for coordination during crisis situations. Her first message was brief but comprehensive. Ward 7 secured by 5 armed intruders seeking access to 10th floor research laboratory. Patients being held as leverage. Request immediate tactical response with hostage considerations. Intruders have inside knowledge of hospital systems and security protocols. Night Nurse Maria Santos maintaining surveillance and ready to assist operations. The response came back within minutes. Emergency Tactical Team en route. Estimated arrival 15 minutes. Maintain position and provide updates on intruder movements. Do not attempt intervention until support arrives. But as Maria read this message, she heard something that made her realize she couldn't wait for tactical support. From one of the patient rooms came the sound of Mrs. Patterson crying out in pain, followed by Asha's voice, speaking with cold authority. Nurse Santos, I know you are somewhere on this floor. We have 40 patients here, including several who are very elderly and fragile. If you do not present yourself in the next 5 minutes, I will begin harming them until you decide to cooperate. To emphasize his point, there was the sound of medical equipment being roughly disconnected, followed by an elderly man's voice pleading, Please, I need that machine to breathe properly. Please don't hurt me. Maria's military training warred with her nursing instincts. Tactically, revealing herself would put her at tremendous disadvantage and might not save her patients from harm. But professionally and morally, she could not allow vulnerable people under her care to be tortured as a means of drawing her out. She made her decision with the clarity that came from years of experience in life and death situations. She would reveal herself to Asha and his team, but on her own terms and in a way that gave her the maximum possible advantage. If she was going to be forced to help them access the research laboratory, she would find a way to sabotage their mission while protecting her patients. Using the emergency communication station, she sent one final message to the tactical response team. Going to engage with intruders to protect patients. Will attempt to delay their access to laboratory and provide intelligence on their capabilities. If possible, coordinate response with my actions. Then, Maria Santos, the night nurse that everyone ignored, began preparing for the most important battle of her life. She gathered supplies that could be useful, sedatives that could be weaponized, medical equipment that could serve as improvised tools, and her master keys that could control access throughout the hospital. Most importantly, she mentally rehearsed the layout of every corridor, every room, and every potential escape route between Ward 7 and the 10th floor laboratory. She took a deep breath, checked her watch, 3:22 a.m., and began walking towards the main corridor where Asha was waiting. But she wasn't walking as a defeated hospital employee surrendering to armed intruders. She was advancing as a veteran soldier who understood that sometimes the only way to win a battle was to let the enemy think they had already won. Commander Asha, she called out as she emerged from the maintenance corridor, her hands visible but her voice steady and professional. I am Maria Santos, the night nurse for this ward. I understand you need assistance accessing the research laboratory. Before we proceed, I need your assurance that my patients will not be harmed. Asha turned toward her with a mixture of relief and suspicion. Ms. Santos, thank you for being reasonable. Your patients will be safe as long as you cooperate fully with our requirements. We need you to use your hospital access to help us reach the 10th floor laboratory and override certain security protocols. I can do that, Maria said calmly, but I need to understand exactly what you're trying to access so I can determine the correct authorization procedures. The laboratory has multiple security levels, and using the wrong approach could trigger lockdown protocols that would make access impossible. This was both true and strategically useful. Maria did have higher level access than most nurses, but she also knew that any attempt to access the research laboratory would trigger multiple security alerts that would provide precise information to the tactical response team about the intruder's location and intentions. We need access to Dr. Mitchell's research on viral countermeasures, specifically his work on modified pathogen resistance protocols, Asha said, studying Maria's face carefully for signs of deception. Maria nodded, as if this were a routine request. That research is classified at level 7. Which means it requires dual authorization and biometric verification. I can get you to the laboratory level, but actually accessing the data will require additional steps. What she didn't mention was that any attempt to access level 7 classified research would immediately trigger alerts to the Centers for Disease Control, the Department of Homeland Security, and several other federal agencies. Even if these intruders succeeded in reaching the laboratory, they would find themselves facing a much larger and more coordinated response than they had planned for. Good, Asha said. We will proceed immediately. Raman, bring the elevator to this floor. Khalil, maintain your position at the emergency stairs until we return. As they began moving toward the elevator, Maria caught the eye of Mrs. Patterson, who was peering fearfully from her room. She gave the elderly woman a slight nod, trying to convey reassurance and confidence. Whatever was about to happen, Maria was determined that her patients would survive this night, and that these men would not succeed in their mission to steal potentially dangerous research. The elevator arrived with a soft chime that seemed unnaturally loud in the tense atmosphere of the ward. As they stepped inside and began the journey to the 10th floor, Maria realized that she was about to enter the most dangerous phase of this confrontation. But she also knew that she had advantages these men couldn't imagine, and she intended to use every single one of them. The elevator rose slowly toward the 10th floor, and Maria could feel the tension radiating from the 3 armed men surrounding her. Commander Asha stood directly behind her, his assault rifle held in a ready position but not directly threatening. Raman flanked her left side, constantly scanning the elevator's digital display and checking his radio for communications from their base command. The third man, whose name she had learned was Yusuf, positioned himself at the elevator controls, ready to override any security stops. As they climbed past the 8th floor, Maria's mind worked frantically to process every detail of their situation. The tactical response team would arrive at Ward 7 in approximately 10 more minutes, but by then she and these intruders would be 3 floors away, in one of the most secure areas of the hospital. The 10th floor housed not just Dr. Mitchell's research laboratory, but also the hospital's main computer servers, telecommunications equipment, and emergency command center. If these men gained access to the computer systems, they could potentially compromise the entire hospital's security network. But Maria had one crucial advantage that Asha and his team didn't know about. During her 12 years at St. Charles, Mary's General Hospital, she had been involved in several emergency drills and security assessments that had given her detailed knowledge of the 10th floor's layout and security protocols. More importantly, she knew about the building's hidden vulnerabilities that existed due to budget cuts and administrative oversights. Vulnerabilities that she could exploit if she played her cards correctly. The elevator chimed softly as it reached the 10th floor, and the doors opened to reveal a brightly lit corridor lined with biometric scanners, security cameras, and warning signs indicating restricted access areas. This level of the hospital was designed to be impregnable, with multiple layers of security that required specific clearances and authorization codes that changed according to complex schedules. Very impressive, Asha murmured, as he surveyed the security measures.
Your hospital takes its research security seriously.
This is exactly the kind of protection we expected to encounter. Maria nodded, maintaining her cooperative demeanor while mentally cataloging every security device and potential tactical advantage. The laboratory is at the end of this corridor past 3 security checkpoints. Each checkpoint requires different levels of authorization, and the final laboratory door requires both biometric scanning and a rotating access code. And you have access to all of these security measures? Rahman asked suspiciously. I have emergency override capabilities for most hospital systems, Maria replied truthfully. During medical emergencies, certain staff members need to be able to access any area of the hospital immediately. But using those overrides triggers multiple alert systems that notify administrators and security personnel. Asher considered this information carefully. How long do we have before these alerts bring unwanted attention? Normally, about 15 to 20 minutes before security investigates emergency overrides. But at night, with reduced staffing, it could be longer. Maria was deliberately misleading them about response times, hoping to buy more time for the tactical team to position themselves effectively. They began walking down the corridor, passing the first security checkpoint without triggering any alarms thanks to Maria's legitimate access credentials. But as they approached the second checkpoint, Maria noticed something that made her pulse quicken with hope. Mounted on the wall near the security scanner was a small red emergency button marked Laboratory Containment Protocol. This was part of the hospital's biocontainment system, designed to immediately seal the research laboratory in the event of a dangerous pathogen release or security breach. If she could activate that system without being detected, it would trap them inside the secure area, while simultaneously alerting every emergency agency in the city to a potential biological hazard situation. The response would be immediate and overwhelming, but it would also be extremely dangerous if Asher decided to harm hostages in response to being trapped. Miss Santos, Asher said as they paused at the second checkpoint, I want you to understand that we are professionals. We have no interest in harming anyone necessarily, but we will do whatever is required to complete our mission. If you attempt to sabotage our operation or alert security, the consequences will extend beyond just yourself to the patients in your care. Maria met his gaze steadily. I understand. I just want to get through this night with everyone alive and unharmed. She used her access card to open the second security door, and they continued toward the laboratory complex. As they walked, Maria began implementing a carefully calculated plan that drew on her military training and her intimate knowledge of the hospital's systems. She began subtly slowing their progress by asking detailed questions about exactly what research data they needed, and explaining the complicated procedures required to access different classification levels. Dr. Mitchell's research is compartmentalized into several different projects, she explained as they approached the third checkpoint. Viral countermeasure protocols are classified separately from pathogen resistance studies, and those are different from the bioweapon defense research. If you're looking for specific data, I need to know exactly which classification codes to use. This was both helpful to them and strategically useful to her. By getting them to reveal the specific nature of their intelligence-gathering mission, Maria was collecting information that would be crucial for the authorities to understand exactly what had been compromised and what might still be at risk. We need everything related to modified pathogen resistance, particularly Dr. Mitchell's work on engineered immunity protocols, Yusuf said before Asher could stop him. Asher shot his subordinate a sharp look, but the damage was done. Maria now understood that they were after research that could be used to develop biological weapons that were resistant to current medical countermeasures, information that could pose a catastrophic threat to public health if it fell into the wrong hands. That research is classified at the highest level, Maria said. Accessing it will trigger immediate federal notifications that can't be overridden or delayed. Are you sure you want to proceed? We are prepared for increased security response, Asher replied. Our timeline accounts for federal involvement. This told Maria that the operation was much larger than just these 5 men. They had extensive intelligence about hospital security protocols, federal response procedures, and probably escape routes that would allow them to evade capture even after triggering massive security alerts. But it also told her that they were working under strict time constraints, which meant that any delays she could create might disrupt their entire operation. They reached the final laboratory door, which was protected by a sophisticated biometric scanner that required both fingerprint and retinal identification. Maria had legitimate access to this system, but using it would create detailed logs that would later be investigated by federal security agencies. Place your finger on the scanner and look into the retinal reader, Asher instructed, positioning himself where he could watch both Maria and the corridor behind them. Maria hesitated for just a moment, then made her move. Instead of immediately complying with the biometric scan, she turned toward Asher with a concerned expression. Before I open this door, I need you to understand something important about the laboratory's security systems. Once we're inside, the laboratory goes into automatic lockdown mode to prevent unauthorized removal of research materials. The lockdown lasts for exactly 12 minutes, and during that time, no one can enter or leave the laboratory. This was partially true. The laboratory did have automatic security protocols, But Maria was exaggerating their severity to make Asha reconsider the wisdom of proceeding. She was also buying time while she positioned herself near the emergency containment button. 12 minutes is acceptable, Asha said after consulting his watch. Our extraction timeline allows for brief delays. There's one more thing, Maria continued. The laboratory's ventilation system is designed to contain dangerous pathogens. If the containment protocol is activated for any reason, the entire area is sealed and flooded with sterilization gases. Anyone inside has about 3 minutes to evacuate through the emergency airlock, or they risk serious injury from the decontamination process. This was completely true, and Maria could see that Asha was beginning to understand that entering the laboratory carried significant risks that his intelligence hadn't accounted for. How would the containment protocol be activated? Rahman asked nervously. Automatically, if certain sensors detect pathogen release. Manually, if someone presses one of the emergency containment buttons located throughout this area. Or remotely if federal authorities determine that a security breach poses a biological hazard risk. Asha studied Maria's face carefully, trying to determine whether she was providing genuine safety information or attempting to dissuade them from their mission. After a long moment, he nodded. We proceed. You will open the laboratory and we will work quickly to avoid triggering containment protocols. If any emergency systems activate, you will be the first to suffer the consequences. Maria placed her finger on the biometric scanner and looked into the retinal reader. The system beeped softly and flashed green, indicating successful authentication. The heavy laboratory door began to slide open with a soft hydraulic hiss, revealing a sophisticated research facility filled with computer workstations, specialized equipment, and multiple server arrays containing terabytes of classified research data. But as the door opened, Maria heard something that filled her with hope and terror in equal measure. From somewhere far below in the hospital, carried through the ventilation system, came the faint sound of vehicles arriving, and radio communications indicating that the tactical response team had reached St. Mary's General Hospital. Asha heard it too, his head tilting slightly as he strained to identify the sounds. Rahman, contact Khalil immediately. I want to know the status of our security perimeter. Rahman spoke rapidly into his radio device, switching between Arabic and English as he tried to reach their teammate, who had been left to guard the emergency stairwell on Ward 7. After several attempts, his face grew pale. Commander, Khalil is not responding. I'm getting only static on his frequency. That means our position has been compromised, Asha said grimly. We have to accelerate our timeline. Santos, you will help us download Dr. Mitchell's research data immediately. Any delay or sabotage will result in immediate retaliation against your patients. But as they prepared to enter the laboratory, Maria made her final, desperate move. While Asha and Rahman were focused on the radio communications and the laboratory equipment, she pressed her body against the wall and slammed her hand down on the red emergency containment button. Immediately, alarms began blaring throughout the 10th floor. Red lights flashed in the corridors, and a computerized voice began announcing, Laboratory containment. Protocol activated. All personnel evacuate immediately. Decontamination sequence will begin in 3 minutes. Asha spun toward Maria with fury in his eyes, raising his weapon, but she was ready for his reaction. You can kill me, she said steadily, but that won't stop the containment protocol. The only way to avoid the decontamination sequence is to evacuate this area immediately, and once we leave, you won't be able to return. The laboratory will remain sealed until federal authorities clear it for access. You have betrayed our agreement, Asha snarled. But Maria could see the calculation behind his anger. Killing her would not solve his tactical problem, and remaining in the laboratory area would expose his team to genuinely dangerous decontamination procedures. I have saved your lives, Maria replied. The sterilization gases used in the decontamination process can cause permanent respiratory damage or death. If you leave now, you can still escape the hospital before the tactical teams seal all the exits. The computerized voice continued its countdown. Decontamination sequence will begin in 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Asha spoke rapidly into his radio, trying to coordinate with his base command and assess their options.
Maria could hear fragments of the Arabic conversation and understood enough to know that their extraction plan was collapsing.
The tactical response team's arrival had disrupted their security perimeter, and the containment protocol had made it impossible to access the research data they had come to steal. Decontamination sequence will begin in 2 minutes. We evacuate now, Asha announced to his team. The mission is compromised, but we can still escape if we move immediately. As they prepared to leave the laboratory area, Maria realized that her actions had succeeded in protecting the classified research, but had also created a new problem. If these men escaped the hospital, they would certainly attempt to harm her patients in Ward 7 as retaliation for her sabotage of their mission. But as they reached the elevator, Maria heard something wonderful. From the stairwell came the sound of tactical boots moving rapidly up the floors, accompanied by radio communications indicating that the hospital was being secured by law enforcement agencies. The tactical response team had used the time that Maria's delays provided to position themselves throughout the building. Decontamination sequence will begin in 1 minute. Asha pushed the elevator call button repeatedly, but the display showed that the elevator was stopped on the 3rd floor and not responding to their calls. The elevators are locked down as part of the containment protocol, Maria explained. We have to use the emergency stairs. They rushed to the stairwell, but as Asha pulled open the door, they were confronted by the sound of tactical teams moving up from multiple floors below. They were trapped between the approaching law enforcement officers and the laboratory's decontamination sequence. Decontamination sequence will begin in 30 seconds. In that moment, Maria Santos made the choice that would define not just this night, but the rest of her life. Looking directly at Asha, she said, "If you surrender now, I'll testify that you never harmed any patients and that you were professional throughout this operation. If you try to fight your way out, people will die unnecessarily." Asha met her gaze, and for a moment, she saw not a terrorist or enemy combatant, but a professional soldier who understood that his mission had failed, and that continued resistance would only lead to casualties on both sides. Decontamination sequence beginning. All personnel must evacuate immediately. "Put down your weapons," Asha called out to his team, his voice carrying the authority of command. "We surrender." As the tactical officers secured the 3 men and escorted them away from the laboratory area, Maria Santos stood in the corridor, watching the flashing red lights and listening to the hum of the decontamination equipment beginning its sterilization cycle. She had successfully protected her patients, prevented the theft of dangerous research data, and managed to end the confrontation without anyone being killed. But more than that, she had proven that the person everyone ignored, the quiet night nurse who walked these corridors in darkness while others slept safely at home, was exactly the person they needed when everything went wrong. In the space of a few hours, Maria Santos had transformed from an invisible hospital employee into a hero whose actions had potentially prevented a catastrophic threat to public health and national security. When the tactical team leader approached her for debriefing, he looked at this small, middle-aged woman with something approaching awe. "Miss Santos, I understand that you single-handedly delayed these intruders, provided intelligence on their mission, and prevented them from accessing classified research materials. That takes remarkable courage and tactical thinking." Maria looked tired but satisfied as she replied, "I was just doing my job. Our patients needed protection, and the hospital's research needed to be kept secure. That's what I'm here for." As dawn broke over St. Mary's General Hospital, Maria Santos returned to Ward 7 to complete her shift, checking on Mrs. Patterson and the other patients who had been frightened by the night's events but were ultimately unharmed. She documented the incident in her nursing notes with the same careful attention to detail she applied to all aspects of patient care. The hospital administrators who had ignored her reports about security camera malfunctions would spend the coming days dealing with federal investigators and trying to understand how their night nurse had become the most important person in preventing a national security disaster. But for Maria, the most important thing was that when she walked through the quiet corridors of Ward 7 that morning, every one of her patients was alive, safe, and ready to continue their recovery. That was worth being ignored, worth being overlooked, worth being invisible to everyone except the people who needed her most. In the end, that was all Maria Santos had ever wanted, to be the guardian angel that her patients deserved, whether anyone else noticed or not.